When my father died, I thought I'd lost everything until I discovered the truth. My family erased my name from his will, buried secrets behind smiles, and called it family loyalty. But silence can only last so long. This is the story of how I uncovered their lies, exposed their greed, and reclaimed not just my inheritance, but myself. Every secret has a price, and I made sure they paid it in full.
I didn't cry at my father's funeral. Not because I didn't love him once, but because I had already run out of tears for that man years ago. By the time they lowered the casket, I had nothing left to give except the polite kind of grief people expect to see, the kind that photographs well. I stood between my mother and my brother, staring at the ground while the pastor's voice cracked through the cold November air. The cemetery was small, just outside Millbrook, the kind of town that still prides itself on family names and Thanksgiving parades. My father had built half of it. Every third house on Main Street had his company's stamp on the mortgage. People called him a pillar of the community, a man who provided, who built, who led. I used to believe that. I used to think legacy meant kindness, that being a provider meant taking care of your family. But when you grow up in a house like ours, you learn that appearances matter more than affection. Dean, my brother, played the part perfectly. He had that easy charm that made people forget how deep his lies ran. Even at the funeral, he managed to look broken just enough, shoulders heavy, chin tilted down, eyes wet but not messy. My mother looked at him like he was a miracle. She's always looked at him that way, even when he was 26 and still asking for loans from my parents to cover his gambling debts. I was invisible next to them, as usual. That's how they preferred it. After the service, we drove back to the house, the big one on Willow Street, the one everyone in town called the Masons' Mansion, though it was really just a 4-bedroom colonial with too many empty rooms. My mother insisted on hosting a reception there, said it would be what Dad wanted. She had the whole place staged like an open house, candles lit, flowers arranged, catering trays lined up like we were auditioning for a lifestyle magazine. People came and went, whispering condolences that felt like small talk. He was such a good man, they said. He built so much for this town. I nodded, thanked them, refilled their coffee cups, and kept my face neutral. It wasn't that I didn't have memories. I did, hundreds of them, some good, most not. I remembered his long silences, the kind that could freeze a room, the way he'd correct my mother's tone mid-sentence, the way his love came with conditions, hidden in phrases like, "You're lucky to have what you have," or "You should be more like your brother." I remember being 12, asking for money for a school trip, and him saying, "Ask Dean. He's the future of this family." Dean was 16 then, already wrecking his first car and lying about it. But my father believed in him like religion. The only thing my father ever taught me was how to stay quiet when the people you love make you small. The will reading was set for the next morning. My mother asked me to come, though her tone made it sound more like an obligation than an invitation. "Your father wanted us all there," she said, eyes fixed on the sink while she washed a single glass she'd already cleaned twice. I nodded. Dean, of course, showed up late. He walked into the lawyer's office with that casual swagger that used to charm teachers and now worked on waitresses and creditors. He hugged my mother, shook hands with Mr. Halverson, the family lawyer, and dropped into the chair beside me like he owned the place. The office smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. Halverson looked uncomfortable before he even opened the folder. "Your father was a very organized man," he started, which I knew was code for "prepare yourself." The will was short, clinical, and devastating. Every asset, the company, the house, the savings accounts, the stocks, was left to Dean. Everything. My name was mentioned only once, attached to a small life insurance policy to be distributed at the discretion of the executor. The executor was Dean. I didn't speak.
My mother dabbed her eyes, whispering something about how your father just trusted Dean to handle things. Dean didn't even pretend to be surprised. He sat there, smirking softly, like this was all some long-running joke I'd finally caught up to. Halverson cleared his throat, offered me a sympathetic glance, and slid a copy of the will across the table. He said, "I know this must be difficult." Difficult? As if watching your entire family inheritance handed to the same man who once stole your credit card was a minor inconvenience. I folded the paper neatly, slipped it into my bag, and thanked him. That's what broke them, I think. That I didn't argue, that I didn't raise my voice, that I didn't demand answers. I just said thank you, stood up, and walked out. That night, the house felt different. The air was heavy, like even the walls knew something had shifted. My mother knocked on my door once before bedtime, asked if I wanted to talk. I told her no. She hovered in the hallway anyway, hand resting on the door frame like she was posing for sympathy. She said, "You know your father meant well. He just believed Dean needed the help more." I wanted to ask, more than me? The daughter who worked 2 jobs to pay off his debts? The one who stayed home to manage the company books when Dean disappeared for weeks on his business trips? But I didn't. I just looked at her and said, "Good night, Mom." She hesitated, then left. From my window, I could see Dean outside in the driveway, talking on his phone, laughing, probably already planning what to sell first. The company, maybe? Or the lake cabin. My father's legacy was now a credit line waiting to be maxed out. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dark outline of the trees. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up balancing the company accounts, the months I'd spent begging Dad to make Dean show up for work, the years I'd been told I was lucky to be included at all. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't mourning a man. I was mourning the illusion of family. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was silent except for the fake hum of the refrigerator. My father's office door was cracked open. I stood there for a minute, then pushed it open fully. Everything was still there. His desk, his planner, his neat rolls of binders labeled by year. I used to help him organize them. I knew how meticulous he was, how nothing ever went unrecorded. Something told me to look closer. I sat down, opened the top drawer, and started flipping through the files. Contracts for construction, payroll sheets, invoices. Then I found it. A folder labeled Personal Transfers. Inside were years of wire receipts. Dean's name on almost everyone. Tens of thousands of dollars at a time, some listed as business loans, others simply marked support. One dated just 6 months before my father's death had my signature on it, forged. Cleanly, almost perfectly. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just favoritism, it was fraud. My father had been moving money through me for years, using my name on accounts I didn't even know existed. Dean wasn't just the golden child. He was the beneficiary of a very deliberate cover-up. I sat there until the sun came up, until the room started to glow with pale orange light. And for the first time since the funeral, I smiled. Not out of happiness, but out of clarity. Because now I knew legacy wasn't about inheritance. It was about exposure. And they had no idea what was coming next. I didn't speak much during the will reading, not because I was shocked, but because shock requires surprise. And I had stopped being surprised by my family a long time ago. The lawyer, Mr. Rollins, cleared his throat the way people do when they know they're about to ruin someone's day, then read out the words like they were carved into stone. All business holdings, property, and personal accounts are to be managed by Dean Whitmore, in trust for his sister, Clara Whitmore. He said it so carefully, like the word trust wasn't the biggest lie in the entire sentence. Dean smiled, not at me, but at my mother. She didn't look back at me either. They just sat there, 2 perfect actors in a play I didn't audition for. Afterward, as everyone began to shuffle out of the office, I asked the only question that mattered. How long is the trust for? Mr. Rollins didn't meet my eyes. Indefinite, he said. I nodded, as if that word didn't hit me like a locked door slamming shut. My father had left me everything, and nothing at all. Dean was in charge. He could give me money or not. He could sell what was mine and call it managing. It was all so clean, so official. A legal way to say you don't matter enough to own your own life. That night, back home in the kitchen, I watched my mother make tea like it was any other Tuesday. She talked about the service, about how proud Dad would have been, about how family has to stick together now. I asked her why Dad didn't trust me to handle my own inheritance. She gave me a tired smile, that tight, brittle kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. You've never been good with responsibility, Clara, she said softly. Your father just wanted to protect you. I stared at her. Protect me from what? From freedom? From equality? From the money I'd helped him earn by working in his office every summer since I was 16? But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded and let her believe I was still the quiet one, the obedient one, the invisible one. Over the next few weeks, Dean moved into Dad's office downtown. He replaced the family photo on the wall with one of himself shaking hands with the mayor. He drove Dad's old truck once before deciding it wasn't his style, and bought himself a brand new Tesla. The same man who couldn't keep a job for more than 6 months was now managing a company worth over $2 million. The town loved it. The papers called him the young heir of Millbrook Construction. My mother beamed whenever someone mentioned his name. And when people asked about me, she'd say, "Oh, Clara's taking time to heal." But healing implies a wound that's visible. Mine wasn't. It lived under the skin, the kind that burns when no one believes you've been hurt. I started spending nights in my father's old study. He'd locked everything, drawers, cabinets, even the filing boxes, as if secrets could survive a coffin. But locks don't scare me. I picked every one of them open with a paperclip and patience. What I found wasn't grief. It was theft. Signed withdrawals I didn't remember authorizing. Business accounts with Dean's name listed as co-owner, years before my father even got sick. There were letters, too. One from a bank in Florida confirming a wire transferred to an offshore account. Another from an insurance agent acknowledging a change in beneficiary. From me to my mother. The paper was dated exactly 2 months before my father's heart attack. I remember sitting there in the dim yellow light, the smell of old wood and dust around me, and realizing something I should have known all along. They hadn't just taken control. They'd planned it. The will wasn't a mistake. It was the final chapter in a story they'd been writing behind my back for years. The house creaked as if it could hear my thoughts. I sat very still, afraid even the walls might whisper what I'd found. Then, quietly, I took photos of everything, every document, every letter, every signature that didn't match my father's. I emailed them to myself, to an address no one knew. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not because I had justice yet, but because now I had proof. Dean started noticing the change in me. He'd stop by the house, acting casual, asking what I'd been up to. He'd offer me coffee, slip little remarks into conversation. "You know, Dad always said you weren't really cut out for business stuff," he'd laugh. "Too emotional." I used to let those things slide. But now, I just looked at him and smiled. "And yet somehow you're managing it all so emotionally well?" He didn't like that. I could tell by the way his jaw tightened. My mother noticed too. She started hovering, calling more often, reminding me to be grateful for all Dean was doing. Gratitude, that was her favorite word. She wielded it like a knife, sharp and polite. One evening, she came over unannounced. She brought a casserole because in our family, deceit always comes with dinner. "You've been distant," she said, setting the dish on the counter. "Dean worries about you." "I'm fine," I told her. "You know your father only wanted the best for you," she said again. "He loved you." I looked at her then, really looked at her. "Did he love me enough to trust me?" I asked. Her eyes flickered just for a second. "Love isn't always about trust," she said softly. "No," I replied softly. "Sometimes it's about control." She didn't answer. She just smoothed her blouse, told me I was being dramatic, and left before the casserole even cooled. I watched her car disappear down the road and felt that strange calm again, the kind that comes right before a storm. I knew what I had to do next. The next morning, I drove to the old town library, the only place in Millbrook where no one looked over your shoulder. I borrowed their dusty computer in the back and started tracing the bank account numbers from the documents I'd found. I didn't expect to find much, but when the name Cayman Holdings popped up linked to a withdrawal from my father's construction company, my heart started pounding. It wasn't just a trust. It was a funnel. Money that should have gone to me, to the employees, to the business itself, had been disappearing long before Dad died. And every trail led back to Dean. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. The pieces were finally forming a picture I didn't want to see, but couldn't look away from either. My father wasn't just manipulated. He'd been isolated, convinced that his own daughter couldn't be trusted, while the son he adored drained his life's work right under his nose. I remember whispering into the dark, as if saying it out loud made it more real. They built this whole thing on lies. And then I smiled, not out of joy, but resolve. Because if they thought I'd stay silent forever, they'd forgotten one thing. Silence is only power until the person holding it decides to speak. The morning after I discovered the Cayman Holdings trail, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't comfort you, just presses down like fog. I'd been up all night connecting the dots, old invoices, email threads, scanned documents my father's assistant had sent years ago. Every line I traced led back to Dean. Offshore transfers, fake consulting fees, even a few construction contracts that were completely fabricated, ghost projects that never existed, yet somehow got paid. I realized this wasn't just about inheritance, it was embezzlement. And it wasn't small. We were talking hundreds of thousands, maybe more. The kind of money that could buy silence for a lifetime. I knew I couldn't handle it alone, but I also knew better than to run straight to the police. Dean had friends everywhere. The bank manager, the county clerk, even half the city council owed him favors after Dad's charity projects. So I went smaller, smarter. I made an appointment with a tax attorney in Harrisburg under my maiden name. I told him I was researching a friend's estate case, and I showed him just enough to keep him interested, but not enough to make him suspicious. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the printouts. "If what you're showing me is accurate," he said slowly, "this could qualify as federal tax fraud, possibly money laundering." He paused. "Your friend should contact the IRS whistleblower division." I nodded, pretending to take notes for someone else. Inside, my pulse was steady, For the first time, I felt like I wasn't the one on defense anymore. When I left his office, it was snowing, the kind that drifts sideways and sticks to your eyelashes. I stood on the steps for a moment, breathing in the cold air, thinking about how every flake falls quietly before it builds into something unstoppable. That's what I wanted to be. Quiet, steady, inevitable. I stopped by a small print shop on the way home and made copies of every document I had. I labeled each folder with an untraceable code, then mailed one to a P.O. box I'd rented under a false name. If Dean or my mother ever suspected me, they wouldn't find everything in one place. I'd learned that from watching them. Never keep all your power in a single room. 2 days later, Dean showed up at my house again. He was smiling, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "You've been busy," he said, glancing around my kitchen. I raised an eyebrow. "Busy how?" "Oh, calling lawyers, digging through Dad's files, talking to people downtown." He leaned against the counter, like he owned the place. "It's not a good look, Clara. People might think you're unstable." There it was, the family script: rewrite the truth until the liar looks like the victim. I sipped my coffee and smiled. "Then I guess they'll have to decide who's telling the story, won't they?" He didn't like that. His jaw twitched. Dad trusted me. He knew how to run things. "And you?" I asked. "Do you?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't want to make enemies you can't afford." I met his gaze. "You've been stealing from Dad's company for years, Dean. Maybe the question is, can you afford me?" He left after that, slamming the door hard enough to shake the windows. I waited a full hour before I moved. Then I went upstairs, opened my laptop, and finished my report. I didn't send it to the IRS yet. I was saving that for the right moment. But I uploaded everything to a cloud drive under encrypted access. Every lie, every signature, every dollar. I wasn't just collecting evidence anymore. I was building a confession, one he'd written himself without even realizing it. By February, the town was already starting to whisper. Dean's new construction projects were delayed, clients were backing out, suppliers weren't returning calls. My mother called me one evening, her voice sweet and brittle. "Have you been saying things about your brother?" "Only the truth," I said. She sighed. "You always twist things to make yourself the victim, Clara. It's exhausting." I wanted to laugh. Me, the victim? The woman who raised a thief, calling me manipulative? But I didn't argue. You can't wake people who choose to dream. "Maybe you should talk to Dean," I said instead. "He seems stressed lately." There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said softly, "he's been making some very interesting financial choices." I could almost hear her heartbeat through the phone. "Clara, what did you do?" "Nothing you wouldn't have done first." And I hung up. After that, things began to unravel faster than I expected. The county assessor's office froze one of Dean's accounts for irregular activity. A local journalist, someone I'd gone to high school with, published a piece about unexplained financial discrepancies in Millbrook construction. Dean blamed former employees, then the accountant, then even my father's old lawyer. But lies are like thread. Pull one, and the whole thing comes apart. By March, the company's investors started backing away. My mother stopped showing her face at church. And me, I just went on with my life, quiet and deliberate, as if I hadn't just turned their empire to dust. But there was one thing I hadn't expected: guilt. Not the kind that says you did something wrong, but the kind that whispers you're becoming them. Every night I'd sit in that same study, surrounded by the ghosts of my father's papers, wondering if revenge ever ends clean. I told myself it wasn't revenge, it was justice. But justice doesn't keep you awake until 3 a.m., replaying your brother's last words. You don't want to make enemies you can't afford. Maybe he was right. Maybe I couldn't afford this, not emotionally, not morally. But it was too late now. I'd set the wheel spinning. Then one evening, as the rain beat against the windows, I got an email. No subject line, no sender name, just an attachment. A scanned page from a will, but not the one I'd seen before. This version was dated 3 months earlier, and in it, my father had left everything directly to me. No trust, no conditions, nothing for Dean. My breath caught. The signature was real, the notary stamp was valid, and in the corner, written in my father's neat handwriting, was a note. If anything happens to me, give this to Clara. That's when I realized my father had tried to fix it. He'd seen through them before he died, and someone, maybe Dean, maybe my mother, had buried the truth. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat, and whispered, "Okay, Dad, I'll finish what you started." The night I found the real will, I couldn't sleep. The words kept echoing in my head. If anything happens to me, give this to Clara. I read them over and over until they blurred into the screen's glow. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of what it meant. My father had known. He hadn't been blind or naive. He'd seen what they were doing, and he tried, in his own flawed, too late way, to protect me. But someone had made sure his voice never reached me. Someone had erased him even before he was gone. By morning, I had a plan. Not the loud, chaotic kind that burns everything at once, but the kind that unravels slowly, the same way they dismantled my life. I printed the document, sealed it in an envelope, and drove to the lawyer's office in Harrisburg. Mr. Rollins looked startled when I placed the papers on his desk. "I found this," I said simply. His eyes widened as he read, "Where did you get this?" "In my father's files, hidden." He took a long breath. "This changes everything." "I know." I folded my hands on the desk. "So let's change everything." Within a week, he'd verified the signature and the notary seal. The new will was legal, valid, and devastating. If presented to the court, it would nullify the trust, strip Dean of control, and transfer everything, business, property, accounts, directly to me. But it wouldn't just hurt him financially. It would destroy his reputation, and my mother's too. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. Justice, I was learning, doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like silence after a storm, heavy, hollow, too still. I thought about keeping it quiet, about walking away, leaving them to drown in their own mess. But then I remembered the look on my mother's face at the will reading, that cold satisfaction when she realized I'd been written out, and Dean's smirk when he told me I wasn't cut out for responsibility. They hadn't just taken my inheritance, they'd taken my dignity, my sense of belonging. They treated me like an afterthought in my own family. And my father's attempt to undo that had been buried with him. No, silence was no longer mercy. It was complicity. I decided to start with Dean. I called him on a Wednesday morning. He didn't answer, so I sent a message. "We need to talk. It's about Dad's will." He called back within minutes. "What do you mean?" "Meet me at the house. 1 hour." When he arrived, he was wearing his expensive coat, that same smug expression he always wore when he thought he was winning. I led him into Dad's study, the same room where I'd found every piece of evidence that condemned him. I slid the envelope across the desk. You might want to read this. He frowned, pulled the papers out, and scanned them. I watched the color drain from his face. This is fake, he said immediately. You forged this. Funny, I said, leaning back. That's what I thought about half the documents you filed under Dad's name. He slammed the papers down. You don't know what you're getting into. I think I do, I said quietly. I've already verified it with Rollins. It's real. And when it goes to probate court, everything you've done will be reviewed. Every missing dollar, every transfer. He stared at me like I'd stabbed him. You'd ruined your own brother? I smiled, not out of cruelty, but clarity. You stopped being my brother the day you made yourself my jailer. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. I expected him to call my mother, and of course he did. She showed up the next morning. No casserole this time, no pretense. She came in like a storm, eyes blazing. What have you done? She demanded. What Dad wanted, I said calmly. Your father didn't understand business. He understood love. He understood trust. You used both like weapons. Her voice cracked, just for a second. You're going to destroy everything we built. No, I said softly. You already did. I'm just pulling off the wallpaper. She stared at me, and for the first time, I saw something real in her eyes. Not guilt, not sorrow, but fear. Not for me or for Dean, for herself. For the fragile image she'd spent decades building, the one where she was the perfect wife, the devoted mother, the woman who kept the family whole. I think she finally realized that it was never about money. It was about control, about the quiet power of being the one who decides who gets to speak and who stays silent. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I taught you silence, Mom, but you never taught me what happens when silence starts speaking back. She left without another word. The next few weeks moved like clockwork. Mr. Rollins filed the new will with the court. The IRS opened an inquiry into the company's finances. Local news picked up the story. Millbrook Construction under investigation for tax fraud. Dean went underground. His social media wiped clean. My mother stopped answering calls. The town that once praised them began whispering in corners. And me? I just watched. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I let the truth do what truth always does. Work quietly, steadily, like roots cracking concrete. The day the court transferred ownership to me, I didn't go to the office. I drove out to the edge of town to the old construction site my father had once called his dream project. It was overgrown now, weeds pushing through concrete, rusted scaffolding creaking in the wind. I parked the car and walked until I reached the half-built frame of what was supposed to be a community center. I remembered standing there as a kid, holding his hand while he said, "One day, people will come here to build something that lasts." For the first time in years, I let myself cry. Not for the money, not even for the betrayal, but for the man who tried, in his imperfect way, to make it right. And for the daughter who'd finally learned that silence isn't peace, it's preparation. When I got back to town, I stopped by the post office and mailed a letter to the IRS, the final piece of documentation, the one that would seal the investigation. Inside, I slipped a note that said simply, "He left me everything. I'm just returning what was mine." That night, I sat in the living room, the same room where my mother told me I wasn't good with responsibility. The lights were low, the air still. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the old wooden floor. For the first time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. I poured myself a glass of wine and looked out the window toward the dark line of trees beyond the yard. Somewhere in that darkness, I could almost hear my father's voice again, steady, patient, proud. I kept my promise, Dad. I spoke. And this time, the silence answered back, not with pain,